a winter night settles over the world. And for a moment, the quiet feels familiar. Yet somewhere beneath that calm lies a puzzle older than any decorated tree or glowing string of lights. Why did civilizations separated by oceans and languages all choose this same dark season to gather around fire, share food, trade gifts, and whisper hopeful stories about returning light? The coincidence looks almost scripted, as if humanity kept rediscovering the same answer to winter's long shadow, leaving behind festivals whose bones still lie under the holiday we now call Christmas. And the deeper you look, the more those ancient roots keep tugging at the present. I'm glad you're here. Wishing you peace, rest, and maybe a little historical inspiration before sleep. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you. Long before anyone imagined a nativity scene, midwinter pressed itself into the lives of early farmers and foragers with unrelenting weight, turning the sky into a kind of celestial clock that demanded attention. Low sunlight, long nights, dwindling harvests, and the quiet anxiety of not knowing whether spring would truly return shaped rituals across Eurasia. Archaeological sites from Scandinavia to Anatolia show gatherings timed around the winter solstice, roughly December 21st, where people marked the single longest night with feasting fire and symbolic acts of survival. In Northern Europe, ancient Germanic communities practiced midwinter rites that invoked protective spirits, honored ancestors, and burned great logs whose embers supposedly carried luck into the coming year. In the Mediterranean, early agricultural villages created communal celebrations meant to reassure one another that nature's cycle still held steady. The sensory landscape of these gatherings feels surprisingly familiar. Imagine homes warmed by hearts, the smell of roasting meat drifting through the cold wooden cups of all clinking in low light, children hiding behind their parents during nighttime processions, and elders telling stories of how the sun once vanished and had to be coaxed back. The theme's darkness giving way to light, endings folding into beginnings. The hope for rebirth appear in cultures separated by geography but united by winter's pressure. Even in Mesopotamia, a region with milder winters, the festival of Zagmar celebrated the renewal of cosmic order, pairing mythic battles with ritual drama meant to reset the year. One of the persistent questions for historians is how these seasonal customs, each shaped by local ecology and belief, converged into patterns so similar that later religions could absorb them without fundamentally altering their emotional resonance. Some scholars argue that the solstice simply forces similar human responses when food scarcity rises and temperatures drop. Communities naturally gather to pool resources, reinforce bonds, and perform symbolic acts, reassuring them that life will continue. Others suggest that migrating tribes carried mid-winter practices along trade routes, creating a web of shared ritual language that crossed political and linguistic borders long before Christianity appeared. Either way, the stage was already set. Winters had become a time of storytelling, generosity, and ritual warmth. Even when the world outside felt bleak in Britain's Neolithic sites, such as New Grange and Mayo, chambered tombs built around 3200 BCE, aligned precisely with the solstice sunrise or sunset, bathing interior stones in a rare beam of golden light for only a few minutes each year. The architecture required astonishing precision, suggesting that the solstice was not merely observed. It was revered, planned for, and woven into the community's most sacred structures. This obsession with light returning from darkness echoes through countless later traditions, as if early farmers encoded hope into stone so it would outlast their memories. When modern visitors see that narrow beam ignite the chamber wall, they witness a message from thousands of years ago. Winter will not stay forever. Further south, early Greek rural festivals honored Dionysus with mid-winter rituals tied to wine fermentation and the promise of spring growth. Revelry masks and noisy processions fill their villages with a lively defiance of the season's hardships. The theme of overturning normal order, letting servants mock masters, encouraging silliness, loosening rules, stemmed from a belief that chaos could purify the year and reset social bonds. These customs would later resonate through Roman Saturnalia and eventually through medieval celebrations that the Church struggled to restrain. Across ancient Persia, the festival of Yalda marked the longest night and celebrated Mitra associated with light, justice, and covenant. Families stayed awake late, ate pomegranates and nuts, and recited poetry to welcome the rebirth of the sun. When the Roman Empire later encountered Mithraic worship among soldiers, the imagery of divine light overcoming darkness found new pathways into imperial culture, leaving symbolic traces that would intersect with early Christian iconography centuries later. What ties these traditions together isn't some single origin point, but rather a shared human reaction to cold scarcity and fear pressures that sparked creativity across the ancient world. Fires were not merely decoration. They were literal survival. Gifts were not symbolic. They were practical acts of sharing food tools or clothing at a time when generosity could determine whether a neighbor made it to spring. Storytelling wasn't a luxury. It was the glue that held trembling communities together, turning personal anxieties into shared narratives about gods and cosmic renewal. And yet among all this cultural variety, one pattern stands out: the belief that winter is the moment when the invisible world grows close. Spirits, ancestors, and unseen forces were thought to wander in the longest nights. Germanic midwinter traditions included protective rites against wandering beings. Celtic communities performed rituals to honor or appease the supernatural. Near Eastern villages retold myths of gods descending into darkness. Winter created a spiritual thinness that demanded ritual responses. And these supernatural associations would eventually color Christmas through angelic announcements, star portents, and the idea that something extraordinary arrived in the depth of winter. By the time Christianity began spreading across the Roman Empire in the first few centuries, CE midwinter had already become an emotional season loaded with expectations. A time to gather, feast, exchange tokens of goodwill, and reaffirm community. These practices were deeply rooted, and no new religion could ignore them without risking cultural alienation. Instead, early Christian leaders learned to reinterpret them, weaving theological meaning through customs people already cherished. Saturnalia arrives in the historical record like the sound of laughter escaping from behind a closed door. Bright and unruly, echoing through the streets of ancient Rome with a confidence that made later Christian traditions borrow from it almost unconsciously. Held originally on December 17th and later extended to a full week, Saturnalia honored Saturn, the agricultural deity tied to sowing time and a mythic golden age when humans lived in effortless harmony. Romans never missed the chance to romanticize that imagined era, and Saturnalia became their annual experiment in recreating it, if only for a few chaotic days. The festivities began with the loosening of social hierarchies, a custom that startled visitors, but created an unmistakable emotional tone. Masters served their slaves at banquets. Public gambling was allowed, and people wore brightly colored clothing instead of the usual sober. To streets buzzed with singing jokes, street theatrics, and a kind of temporary liberation from the rules that normally governed Roman life. In the glow of winter lamps, an entire city rehearsed what life might feel like if duty, decorum, and hierarchy all loosened at once, and the effect was hypnotic. Gift-giving sat at the heart of Saturnalia. Though the presents were usually modest wax candles symbolizing returning light, small clay figurines, or humorous trinkets that carried inside jokes, this tradition traveled astonishingly well, embedding itself into later winter customs across Europe and becoming one of the clearest bridges between the Roman festival and modern Christmas. Even the familiar office secret Santa traces its lineage to Saturnalia's playful exchanges, echoing the same mix of mild embarrassment and warm amusement. One of the lingering historical questions surrounds why Saturnalia grew so influential culturally, especially considering Rome's vast array of festivals. Some scholars suggest that its timing near the solstice gave it added emotional power during the darkest days of the year. Others argue that the theme of temporary social inversion acted as a psychological release valve within Rome's rigid class system. Whatever the reason, Saturnalia achieved what few festivals manage. It became indispensable. When Christianity emerged in the empire, it had to navigate around or through Saturnalia's gravitational pull. As the empire expanded, Saturnalia spread to territories from North Africa to Britain, adapting to local tastes while keeping its core atmosphere intact. In Roman Britain, archaeological finds hint at winter feasts near military outposts, with soldiers receiving small tokens or decorated metal trinkets. In Gaul, local deities blended with Saturn's imagery, creating regional hybrids that blurred the festival's boundaries. In cosmopolitan centers like Alexandria, Saturnalia mingled with Greek holidays and Near Eastern mid-winter rituals, generating a complex fusion that later Christian bishops found both fascinating and frustrating. Part of the festival's charm came from the way it interrupted normal time. Romans spoke of the Die Festi as moments when the world shifted into a gentler alignment, recalling Saturn's mythical golden age. Even the phrase Jodinalia, shouted in streets, homes, and taverns, carried a tone of joyous rebellion. The poet Catullus once called Saturnalia the best of days and historical anecdotes, describes senators laughing alongside servants, children giggling as they opened gifts, and city elites surrendering their solemn dignity for a night of mischief. The Roman state, famously obsessed with control, tolerated Saturnalia's chaos, but kept a careful eye on its edges. Official sacrifices at the temple of Saturn frame the celebration, anchoring it in civic religion, even as the rest of the festival wandered into social playfulness. In 217 BCE, during the Second Punic War, sacrifices were reformed and strengthened to restore divine favor, showing how deeply Saturnalia mattered, not only emotionally but politically. The paradox of state-approved misrule reflected Rome's genius for blending order and indulgence as Christianity gained ground in the 3rd and 4th centuries. Church leaders noticed how deeply Satania was woven into winter life. Bishops complained about Christians participating in the festival, adopting its gift-giving, feasting, and even its roadier amusements. Yet total suppression was impossible. Rome had built Satan earlier into its calendar, its economy, and its social rhythm. Early Christian writers, therefore, adopted a subtler strategy: reinterpretation. If winter was already a season of symbolic reversal, generosity, and light, then it could be reframed to support Christian theology rather than pagan nostalgia. A persistent historiographic debate concerns whether Christmas was placed on December 25th directly to compete with Saturnalia. The traditional scholarly model argues yes, but more recent analysis complicates the picture. December 25 aligned with broader solstice symbolism and also with theological calculations linking Jesus' conception to March 25, and therefore his birth 9 months later. Still, Saturnius' proximity meant that cultural overlap was inevitable, even if the date selection wasn't designed for competition. The festival's emotional footprint shaped how people experienced winter celebrations well into late antiquity. As Saturnalia evolved during the empire's later centuries, additional customs appeared: the appointment of a lord of misrule, a temporary king chosen by lot to oversee antics, and the widespread tradition of public banquets funded by wealthy patrons. These elements later resurfaced in medieval Europe with uncanny similarity, suggesting that Roman customs had quietly embedded themselves into the deep cultural soil from which medieval Christmas grew. The sensory impressions of Saturnalia survive, almost unchanged in today's holiday atmosphere. Public spaces filled with color and lighthouses warmed by abundant food and the gentle permission to relax one's usual seriousness all echo Roman winter cheer. Even the tension between sacred meaning and commercial festivity, so recognizable in modern Christmas, already existed in Rome, where priests lamented the festival's drifting morals, while merchants thrived on seasonal spending. By the time the Western Roman Empire fell in 476, Sicilia had already left its fingerprints across Europe. New kingdoms rose, old rituals blended with Christian practice, and winter celebrations took new forms. Yet the Roman instinct for merry misrule, gift exchange, and symbolic light endured. What people loved most about Saturnalia: its warmth, its generosity, its momentary escape from hardship, proved too human to discard. As the story moves forward, Saturnalia becomes less a standalone festival and more a cultural river flowing beneath later winter traditions. Its currents would shape medieval feasts, influence the emotional tone of Christmas, and subtly guide how Europe understood winter as a time of shared comfort. Even now, when holiday lights flicker across a modern city, their glow feels like a distant echo of wax candles passed between Romans 2,000 years ago, whispering the same message. Let the darkness turn back for a moment. Let joy take the lead. The earliest Christian communities approached the question of Jesus' birth with a kind of gentle uncertainty. Because the New Testament offered no calendar date, no seasonal clue strong enough to anchor the event, and no directive to commemorate it at all. For the first few centuries, Christians focused instead on the Passion and Resurrection, treating those events as the theological heart of their faith. While the Nativity remained a quiet, unanchored story that circulated through sermons, hymns, and private devotion. Yet as the movement grew and drifted across regions shaped by their own winter customs, the desire to understand when the birth occurred slowly gathered momentum, not from doctrinal pressure, but from the human impulse to place beloved stories in time. By the early 2nd century, Christian writers began experimenting with symbolic chronology. Some placed the birth in spring, linking it to themes of new life and agricultural rebirth. Others argued for autumn, pointing to shepherds outdoors at night, which seemed more plausible in the Levant's seasonal climate. But deeper theological reasoning soon overshadowed meteorological logic. A popular belief developed that great prophets were conceived and died on the same calendar date, a symbolic notion derived from Jewish tradition about the sacred symmetry of time. If Jesus' conception occurred on March 25th, already associated with the Passion in some early calculations, then his birth would naturally fall 9 months later on December 25th. This logic, elegant in its symbolism, did not emerge from a single council or papal decree. It drifted through Christian, intellectual circles, where dates often carried layers of meaning, rather than strict historical precision. The documentary trail is faint but compelling. By the mid-3rd century, theological calculations linking March 25th to the Incarnation were circulating widely. And by the early 4th century, December 25th gained traction as the date of the Nativity in Rome. The choice blended theological symmetry with a broader cultural environment shaped by solstice symbolism, even if no one explicitly said so. Meanwhile, apocryphal texts like the Protoevangelium of James expanded the Nativity story with vivid detail. Mary's upbringing, Joseph's hesitation, a cave instead of a stable details that shaped how early Christians imagined the scene, even if the Church did not canonize the text. These narrative expansions show a community trying to visualize sacred history, giving it texture, setting, emotion, and a sense of physical place. When believers gathered to celebrate the birth, they weren't honoring a historical timestamp, so much as stepping into a story that had already become emotionally charged. One persistent, scholarly question centers on how early Christian communities actually observed the Nativity before the date became standardized. Evidence from the 2nd and 3rd centuries suggests that some groups held commemorative gatherings, but practices varied widely. In Alexandria, theologians debated the date, openly recording estimates ranging from May 20 to January 10. In North Africa, sermons alluded to the Nativity as a moment worth remembering, but not yet formally celebrated. In Rome, where the winter festival landscape was already crowded, December 25th gradually settled into a comfortable alignment with public rhythms without directly copying Saturnalia. The overlap was cultural, not conspiratorial. A shift occurred in the early 4th century when Christianity received imperial support under Constantine. New liturgies developed, and the Church began to shape a unified calendar that could strengthen communal identity across the empire. In 336 CE, the chronography of 354, a lavishly illustrated Roman almanac, recorded December 21st as the celebration of Nativus in Bethlehem. Judai Christ was born in Bethlehem of Judea. This is the earliest hard evidence for the date's official use in Rome. It shows that by the mid-4th century Christian winter observance had achieved enough stability to be included alongside imperial events and civic celebrations. But not all regions embraced the date simultaneously. In the Eastern Mediterranean, January 6th remained the primary festival, focused on the baptism of Jesus and known as Epiphany. For a time, Epiphany and Christmas overlapped, diverged, and finally separated into two distinct feasts. In some places, Jesus' birth, baptism, and first miracle were commemorated together as a unified manifestation of divine presence. When December 25th moved eastward in the late 4th century, pushed partly by theological exchange and partly by imperial influence, both dates acquired their own liturgical focus. The East gained Christmas. The West inherited Epiphany. The relationship between them still shapes Christian calendars today. The sensory texture of these early celebrations was likely far simpler than the elaborate medieval and modern forms that came later. Services probably took place at dawn, symbolizing light emerging from darkness. Hymns, some based on Jewish melodic patterns, filled basilicas whose windows captured the faint mid-winter glow. Believers prayed by candlelight, not as ornamentation, but as practical necessity. Sermons emphasized the quiet mystery of the Incarnation and the humility of the birth, themes that resonated with communities living through the uncertainties of late antiquity. Political instability, shifting borders, and the weight of empire-wide change. As Christian art matured, the Nativity gained visual clarity. Early mosaics show Mary seated rather than kneeling, an image of serene contemplation rather than adoration. The infant often appears swaddled in tight white bands, resembling burial cloths, foreshadowing the crucifixion in a way that reflected theological unity between birth and death. The ox and ass appear not in the New Testament, but through interpretations of Isaiah, symbolizing the world's recognition or failure to recognize its Savior. These artistic choices were not decorative whims. They were visual theology, shaping how communities understood the meaning of the birth event. One of the intriguing historiographic debates concerns how much the date of Christmas was influenced consciously or unconsciously by proximity to other winter festivals, especially the Roman celebration of Sol Invictus on December 25th. The evidence is mixed. Some ancient writers explicitly connected Christ with the unconquered Son, interpreting prophetic, verses about light shining in darkness through solar imagery familiar to Roman audiences. Others rejected any association with pagan symbolism. The truth likely lies in cultural osmosis, rather than direct competition. Rome was a world steeped in solar metaphors, and Christian leaders recognized that such imagery could help convey theological ideas to a population already fluent in that symbolic language. As the 4th century progressed, Christmas acquired more structure. Liturgical readings were chosen. Hymns grew in number and processions developed in cities like Jerusalem, where pilgrims visited sites believed to be linked to the Nativity narrative. By the time the empire split and new kingdoms emerged, Christmas was well established as a mid-interfeast with theological, emotional, and communal significance. Its adoption did not erase older traditions, but reframe them, absorbing their warmth while giving them new meaning. The emotional center of these early celebrations rested in the contrast between vulnerability and hope. A child born in obscurity, who nonetheless represented divine presence, fit neatly into Midwinter's theme of fragile light pushing against encroaching darkness. People who lived through long nights, uncertain harvests, and political upheaval found comfort in a story that echoed their own rhythms of fear and renewal. The Nativity narrative, shaped by theology, yet grounded in universal emotional patterns, blended seamlessly with the ancient mid-winter instinct to create warmth where cold prevailed. The rise of December 25th within the Roman world unfolded in the shadow of political change, theological ambition, and a cultural landscape already steeped in solar imagery. As Christianity transformed from a persecuted minority faith into an imperially supported institution in the 4th century, its leaders confronted a delicate challenge: how to express Christian identity within an empire whose winter calendar was dominated by symbols of cosmic renewal, civic pride, and divine light. The shift from Sol Invictus to Christ's Mass did not happen with a single decree. It drifted into place through sermon symbolism and the steady weight of imperial influence. The Feast of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, held on December 25th under Emperor Aurelian in the 270s, celebrated a celestial force that rose each day despite the world's turmoil. It resonated deeply with soldiers, merchants, and urban elites navigating an empire under stress. Solar imagery, already woven into Roman religion for centuries, offered a reassuring metaphor. The sun might weaken, but would always return stronger. When Christianity began expanding its own language about divine light, overlapped naturally with Roman symbolism, new converts familiar with metaphors of dawn, radiance, and victory could transition into Christian worship without abandoning the emotional vocabulary they grew up with. By Constantine's reign in the early 4th century, Christianity and solar symbolism intertwined even more. Coins issued by the emperor depicted him side by side with Saul, a political message affirming divine favor from both traditions. Yet Constantine also promoted Christian worship, supported the clergy, and built churches, creating an environment in which religious imagery blended, overlapped, and slowly shifted toward new interpretations. When bishops described Christ as the true light of the world, or as the sun rising from on high, they weren't borrowing superficially. They were speaking in symbols. Their audiences already understood. The relationship between soul invictors and Christmas remains one of the most debated topics in early Christian history. Some argue that December 25th was chosen deliberately to overshadow a rival festival. Others contend that the date emerged independently from theological calculations and only later gained additional resonance due to cultural context. The documentary evidence doesn't deliver a clear verdict, leaving historians to read patterns rather than proclamations. What is certain is that by the time Christmas appeared in the Roman calendar, in 336, the empire was thoroughly accustomed to treating late December as a time of renewal, light, and cosmic reassurance. The emotional stage was already set. Early Christian sermons from the 4th and 5th centuries reveal how clergy framed the new winter feast. Ambrose of Milan spoke passionately about Christ as the rising sun whose arrival dispelled spiritual night. Augustine warned believers not to worship the physical sun, but encouraged them to reflect on its symbolic testimony to God's creation. Leo the Great used the Nativity to contrast Christian humility with pagan excess, while simultaneously echoing imagery of divine radiance. These sermons show a church negotiating both continuity and contrast, affirming familiar symbols while reshaping their meaning. Meanwhile, imperial support helped solidify Christmas as a unifying feast. As bishops traveled between councils, wrote letters, and guided communities, December 25th increasingly became a shared reference point across the Western Empire. Church architecture reinforced this shift. Basilicas designed with eastern-facing apses capture the dawn light during winter services, turning worship into a literal enactment of theological metaphor. Pilgrims visiting Jerusalem by the late 4th century described processions recalling the Nativity narrative, suggesting that Christmas observance was becoming more elaborate and geographically widespread. The sensory feel of Christmas during this era likely combined solemn liturgy with quiet domestic rituals. Incense drifted through basilicas, mingling with the sound of chanting psalms. Worshippers gathered in the chill of early morning cloaks, wrapped tightly, breath visible in the cold air. Lamps flickered against marble columns and gold mosaics that depicted divine radiance with shimmering tesserae. Families returning home from services may have shared simple meals, told the Nativity story to children, or exchanged small tokens whose meaning blended local custom with Christian reverence. Nothing about this early Christmas looked like the medieval feasts or modern extravagance that would follow. It was humble, reflective, and still finding its place within the broader world of winter tradition. Christian theology also added layers of meaning that earlier solstice festivals never attempted. Birth narratives became a lens for understanding the relationship between divinity and humanity. The infant in the manger symbolized both vulnerability and cosmic authority. The Star of Bethlehem echoed celestial signs familiar to Roman audiences, yet carried a new message about divine guidance. Angels brought the heavenly realm close to earth, resonating with ancient beliefs that winter nights made the boundary between worlds thin. Every detail from shepherds in the field to wise travelers from afar contributed to a sense that the Nativity recast the world's story from the inside. As Christian communities spread into regions beyond Rome, Gaul, Hispania, North Africa, and eventually the Germanic territories, local customs blended with the midwinter feast. Some traditions were absorbed effortlessly. Others required time to adjust. In areas with deep-rooted solstice practices, Christmas became a theological lens through which people reinterpreted existing rituals, aligning them with the story of Christ without abandoning their seasonal symbolism. This merging shaped the emotional landscape of European winter for centuries to come. One of the quieter mysteries in this period concerns how ordinary people experienced the transition from solstice festivals to Christian winter observance. Few personal records survive from farmers, tradespeople, or households that actually lived through the change. Archaeology gives hints, Christian symbols appearing gradually on household items, nativity scenes carved into small objects, tiny lamps decorated with star motifs. But the lived experience remains partially hidden, suggesting a slow blending rather than abrupt replacement. Most people likely continued familiar winter customs while layering Christian meaning onto them, creating a hybrid tradition that felt both ancient and new. Gradually, Christ's Mass Christissa became more than a liturgical event. It became a season, a mood, a shared experience that stretched beyond the church walls into homes, markets, and community gatherings. The festival's roots in Roman society, its ties to solstice symbolism, and its theological depth all converged into a winter observance capable of transforming culture from within. By the time the Western Roman Empire fractured in the late 5th century, Christmas had already taken on a momentum that no political collapse could undo. As the Western Roman Empire dissolved and new kingdoms emerged from its fragments, Christmas slipped quietly into the evolving rhythm of medieval Europe, carried not by imperial decree, but by monks, migrants, merchants, and memory. The festival entered a world of wooden halls, fortified villages, and monastic communities that rose as islands of literacy and stability amid political uncertainty. Within this shifting landscape, Christmas began its long transformation from a solemn liturgical feast into a season woven through every layer of medieval life: courtly, rural, sacred, and domestic. The earliest medieval custodians of Christmas were monasteries, which preserved the liturgical calendar with meticulous care. In Benedictine communities, nights were long and structured by prayer. The Nativity offered a moment of warmth that punctuated winter's severity. Chanting monks filled stone chapels with melodies that echoed against high arches, while candles flickered in carefully arranged rows. The liturgy expanded, absorbing readings, antiphons, and hymns that emphasized divine humility and cosmic reversal. The mighty born among the poor, the infinite made small in human form. The theological depth that late antiquity had cultivated now blossomed in monastic scriptoria, where illuminated manuscripts gave Christmas visual splendor. Mary in deep blues, the Christ child bright against dark winter palettes. But Christianity in medieval Europe was never purely monastic. Tribal confederations, migrating peoples, and newly forming dynasties carried their own seasonal rituals, many of them tied to pre-Christian mid-winter customs. When Germanic converts brought their traditions into Christian practice, the shape of Christmas subtly widened. Feasting, gift-giving, and communal gatherings already familiar from Roman Saturnia merged with northern customs that honored ancestors, marked the turning of the year, and strengthened community bonds during the harshest weeks. Church leaders sometimes tolerated these practices, sometimes scolded them, but could never fully separate winter joy from winter religion. One of the most fascinating transitions of this period appears in the fusion of Christian symbolism with Germanic kingship. In 800 CE, Charlemagne chose Christmas Day for his imperial coronation in Rome, allowing the festival to become entangled with political theater. The celebration of divine birth and the crowning of a Christian emperor created a narrative alignment that echoed through later centuries, earthly authority, framed by sacred timing. Chroniclers described the event with solemn awe, linking Charlemagne's rule with the cosmic renewal signified by Christ's birth. Kings who followed him recognized the power of such symbolism, anchoring coronations, assemblies, and legal decrees to major feast days in ways that reinforced legitimacy. Meanwhile, village life shaped Christmas on a more intimate scale. Rural households across Europe relied on community interdependence during winter, and the Nativity became an anchor for gatherings, storytelling, and shared meals. In Anglo-Saxon England, the midwinter festival, Giola or Yule, blended seamlessly into Christmas observance. Feasts lasted for days. Halls were decorated with evergreen branches symbolizing life in darkness, and hospitality became a moral duty. Households offered food to travelers, widows, and the poor, linking ancient customs of winter generosity with Christian teachings about charity and compassion. The sensory world of medieval Christmas was thick with contrasts, cold air outside and warm hearths within. Dimstone churches illuminated by candlelight, the drone of chant balanced by the laughter of feasting halls, bread baked in clay ovens, meat roasted over open flames, and spiced all filled long wooden tables. Storytellers recited tales of saints, kings, and legendary wanderers whose journeys echoed humanity's search for light in dark seasons. Children learned the Nativity story, not only through scripture, but through mystery plays, early theatrical performances staged by clergy or lay guilds. These plays gave biblical narratives physical form, bringing shepherds, angels, and kings into village squares, where the community gathered under winter skies. Yet the blending of sacred and secular customs did not always progress smoothly. Church councils throughout the Middle Ages complained about excessive revelry, gambling, drunkenness, and remnants of pagan rituals persisting at Christmas time. In the 12th century, clerics in France lamented that many still celebrated the season with rowdy dances and mask processions, echoing Satan Earlier's ancient misrule. In England, concerns about heathen practices appeared in ecclesiastical writings long after the country had officially embraced Christianity. These tensions reveal a persistent medieval mystery. How much of pre-Christian winter ritual survived beneath the surface of Christmas, quietly shaping behavior despite official disapproval? Another thread shaping medieval Christmas was the development of liturgical drama. By the 11th century, monastic dramatizations of the Nativity. Initially, small additions to the liturgy grew into elaborate performances that included shepherd dialogues, angelic choirs, and symbolic gestures, like presenting the Christ child to the congregation. These dramas eventually left the church interior and entered town squares, where guilds and craftsmen took charge of staging them. The Nativity story became communal art blending religious instruction with entertainment. Snow might fall on the performers' torches, burned along the edges of makeshift stages, and villagers huddled together to watch scenes that brought sacred history into their own familiar landscapes. In Scandinavia and the Germanic North, midwinter rituals connected with the figure of Odin associated with winter journeys and gift-giving left cultural traces that some scholars believe influenced Christmas folklore. Hunt a spectral procession across Winterside. A Sosai became associated with warnings, blessings, and supernatural encounters when Christianity spread into Buffon. These redeems. Elements of this mythology persisted, later reinterpreted through Christian lenses or absorbed into folk traditions around Christmas visitors. Protective spirits or mid-winter guardians. Though speculative, these connections show how medieval Christmas remained porous, capable of absorbing earlier beliefs without losing its core identity. By the 9th and 10th centuries, Christmas had become one of the major feasts of the liturgical year, rivaling Easter in popular enthusiasm, even if not in theological weight. Chronicles from the Carolinian world described kings distributing arms, hosting elaborate meals, and granting charters to monasteries during the season. Diplomatic exchanges often included festive gifts, and as trade networks expanded, linking Scandinavia, Western Europe, the Mediterranean, and even distant Bantium, the exchange of seasonal goods spread ideas about how Christmas might be celebrated. A merchant from Venice arriving in a Frankish port might encounter customs that felt familiar yet distinct, shaped by shared faith, but molded by local climate, history, and taste. Even silence had its place in medieval Christmas. For monks waking before dawn, the hours of darkness surrounding the midnight mass created a quiet space for contemplation. Snow muffled the world outside. The small flame of a single candle could feel like a ritual in itself. In villages, too, the hush of winter nights gave Christmas an introspective undertone. After feasting, families gathered near the fire, listening to the wind against wooden shutters, while the nativity story was told again, soft and slow, helping children fall asleep as snow drifted gently through the world. Medieval Europe settled into a winter rhythm that balanced devotion with indulgence, and Christmas gradually expanded into a season marked by feasts, revelry, and customs that blurred the lines between sacred celebration and communal mischief. With the agricultural year paused, fields resting under frost, and labor slowed by darkness, people leaned into inter-gatherings that mixed Christian teaching with folk traditions that refused to fade. The tension between clerical restraint and popular exuberance created a holiday landscape filled with warmth, noise, generosity, and occasional chaos. exactly the kind of lived-in texture that later reforms would try and fail to erase. Feasting lay at the heart of medieval Yuletide. Even the poorest households saved resources for a meal that felt special. Sometimes the only abundance they would experience all year. Wealthier families roasted boars' heads, served spiced wine, and decorated tables with evergreen cutings symbolizing life in the dead of winter. In England, the BS Head feast became so iconic that universities later preserved it as ceremonial tradition. Across Europe, cooks prepared dishes seasoned with cloves, cinnamon mace, and ginger, luxuries made possible by expanding trade routes and the slow drip of goods from the east. To sit at a winter table was to taste the world beyond one's village, a reminder that global exchange shaped even the smallest rituals. Communal drinking played its part as well. Was sailing a custom rooted in Anglo-Saxon traditions involved groups visiting homes or orchard trees while offering blessings in exchange for drink. It carried echoes of older rites meant to secure prosperity for the coming year. Villagers sang seasonal verses, some solemn, some rowdy, while holding carved wooden bowls of hot ale, mixed with spices and apples. Although the church frowned on the more unruly aspects where sailing survived, because it answered a simple human need to reaffirm bonds during the darkest days, to remind one another that community could outshine cold. Misrule became another beloved element of the season. Many manors and towns appointed a lord of misrule, a temporary overseer of scripted disorder who orchestrated games, dances, and pranks. The role drew from ancient patterns of ritual inversion. The young teasing the old, the poor joking with the wealthy authority figures, willingly surrendering control for a day or two. At its best, misrule relieved social pressure and allowed people to laugh at the rigid hierarchies that define their lives. At its worst, it slipped into drunkenness and excess, prompting periodic church complaints and even official bans in particularly tense regions. Yet misrule endured because winter needed levity. Without it, the season felt too heavy to bear. The sensory world of these celebrations was vibrant and textured. Imagine the warmth of a timber hall, lit by torchlight shadows dancing against the beams, while musicians played lutes, pipes, or drums. The smell of roasting meat drifted into the cold night whenever doors opened. Children slipped between tables to watch performers, jugglers, mummers, or wandering storytellers whose tales carried remnants of older mythologies. In parts of France and Germany, masked processions filled the streets, their costumes blending Christian symbolism with deep folklore. Bells jingled on hats, carved wooden masks glared or grinned, and torches illuminated snowflakes falling in slow spirals. Church leaders struggled to balance the spiritual solemnity of Christmas with the boisterous atmosphere surrounding it. Sermons regularly warned against excessive drinking, gambling, and heathen remnants, suggesting that many customs stretched Christian patience. Yet, the church itself helped shape the festive mood by expanding the liturgical season. Advent, originally a period of fasting and preparation, softened gradually into a contemplative lead-up to Christmas. Special masses like the Midnight Mass added emotional resonance. Choirs sang newly composed hymns that floated through cold basilicas and village chapels. Their music becoming part of winter's emotional fabric. A curious historical puzzle emerges here. Although church authorities criticized popular customs, they rarely succeeded in eliminating them. Instead, local traditions adapted, absorbed, or disguised themselves. Was sailing connected itself to Christian blessing? Mama's plays inserted nativity scenes or saintly themes into older dramatic forms. Even misrule found justification in theological symbolism, humility reversal. The surprising overturning of the worldly power ideas already present in the nativity story. The holiday became a negotiation, rather than a battleground, a place where different traditions could coexist without fully surrendering their identities. In towns and cities, Kills reshaped Christmas into a moment of communal identity. Craft organizations sponsored feasts, charity drives, and dramatic performances. Their plays often depicted the shepherds, the magi or angels bringing messages to the world. But they also included comic characters whose antics delighted audiences. These performances brought scripture into everyday life, giving people who could not read a vivid sense of the nativity through sound movement and imagery. In some places, entire cycles of plays developed, stretching from Advent through Epiphany, turning winter into a narrative journey. Hospitality also became a moral and social obligation. Wealthy households opened their doors to tenants and travelers, offering food, warmth, and occasional gifts. In England, the custom of the open hall allowed villagers into the Lord's manor to eat and drink during the season. In Ireland and parts of Scotland, doors were left unlatched on Christmas Eve so that strangers in need could enter. These practices reflected ancient patterns of mid-winter generosity, but also echoed Christian teachings on mercy and kindness. A society defined by sharp class divides softened momentarily, allowing a kind of shared humanity to emerge beneath the glow of torches and tallow candles. Music carried the season's emotional weight. The earliest carols were not solemn hymns, but lively dance songs. Carol literally meant a ring dance. Only gradually did carols take on more explicitly Christian narratives, blending joy with devotion. Traveling minstrels spread melodies from region to region, creating a patchwork of local styles. In England, the Coventry Carol, with its haunting melody and focus on the massacre of the innocents, reveals how medieval Christmas could hold sorrow and beauty in the same breath. In France, vibrant refrains fill churches and taverns alike. Even today, many carol structures preserve the distinctive L of medieval music. Despite the joyful noise of the season, winter carried darker undertones. Families remembered the dead-honored ancestors and told stories meant to bridge the visible and invisible worlds. Some households burned special logs, precursors to the Yule log, believing the ashes protected the home. Others kept vigil through the longest nights, watching stars prick the sky like distant promises. These practices highlight how Christmas did not erase the older emotional landscape of mid-winter, but lived alongside it, offering comfort in a world where cold illness and uncertainty shaped daily reality. By the early 16th century, Christmas entered a storm. It had not anticipated a century of reform, theological conflict, and cultural fracturing that reshaped nearly every aspect of Christian life. The holiday that once blended devotion, feasting misrule, and folk custom now stood in the path of reformers who questioned not only doctrine, but the entire emotional vocabulary of medieval celebration. The Reformation did not erase Christmas, but it cracked it open, exposing layers of meaning, contesting its practices, and forcing communities to reconsider what the festival truly represented. Some traditions sharpened into clearer forms. Others splintered into regional variations. Some nearly vanished before quietly returning. At the heart of the conflict was a simple tension. The medieval Christmas season contained both sacred observances and deeply rooted popular customs, and reformers disagreed on where to draw the line between faithful devotion and inappropriate excess. Martin Luther, for instance, criticized many practices he considered abuses. Yet, he cherished the Nativity story and saw Christmas as a moment for teaching grace, humility, and familial warmth. He encouraged congregational singing, supported the use of Christmas hymns, and even promoted the image of the Christ kind, the Christ child, as a gift-bearer that might gently redirect attention away from saints. His approach preserved Christmas, but reshaped its emotional center. Other reformers, especially within the more radical wings of Protestantism, took a stricter view. Haltingly discouraged festive music and churches. John Calvin emphasized sober worship and moral discipline. Many Reformed communities restricted celebration to simple scripture readings and sermons. To them, medieval revelry, dramatic performances, and seasonal misrule were distractions that pulled people's minds away from the spiritual significance of Christ's birth. Plays, carols, and public feasts all came under scrutiny. While these leaders did not deny the theological importance of the Incarnation, they questioned whether Christmas ought to be celebrated at all, especially since the Bible did not command such a festival. A historical puzzle emerges here. How did ordinary people respond when cherished traditions suddenly became controversial? Records suggest a mixture of compliance, resistance, and quiet adaptation. In some towns, families shifted celebrations into private homes rather than public streets. In others, communities found ways to merge older customs with new expectations, retaining feasting but removing theatrical elements, keeping carols, but modifying lyrics or trimming festivities to a single day instead of 12. These compromises show how deeply Christmas was woven into social life. Even sharp doctrinal disputes could not wholly sever its seasonal rhythms. Meanwhile, in Catholic regions, the holiday entered a period of renewed splendor. The Counter-Reformation sought to reinforce the emotional power of Christian festivals, viewing them as opportunities to strengthen communal identity and devotional practice. Nativity scenes flourished in Italy, featuring elaborate figures, painted backdrops, and miniature landscapes. Baroque art poured dramatic light onto the Nativity, emphasizing tenderness and divine radiance. Sacred music expanded with compositions by Palestrina Victoria and Monteverdi, filling cathedrals with sound that swelled like candle light rising into vaulted ceilings. In Spain and parts of France, processions and devotional dramas revived with heightened pageantry, reaffirming Christmas as a celebration of God entering the world. One of the Reformation's quieter effects on Christmas was the shifting role of gift-givers. In Catholic regions, St. Nicholas retained his stature as a patron of generosity. His feast day, December 6th, remained a moment when children received sweets, coins, or small handmade toys. In Protestant lands, however, saints were viewed with skepticism, and St. Nicholas gradually faded in public significance. Luther's Christ kind, sometimes imagined as an angelic figure, stepped in to deliver gifts on Christmas Eve, moving the practice closer to the Nativity and away from saintly intercession. This transition later influenced the development of the Christ kindle and indirectly shaped the evolution of Santa Claus through German immigration to the Americas. In England, the story took a sharper turn. Although the early Anglican Church retained Christmas in its calendar, Puritan influence grew during the 17th century, arguing that the festival encouraged idleness, drunkenness, and superstition. Sermons denounced Christmas feasts as anti-Christian, and the season became a battleground between those who cherished its warmth and those who saw it as a remnant of Rome. The stage was set for more dramatic conflict, a foreshadowing of the outright bans that would appear during the English Commonwealth and even across the Atlantic in New England. But that chapter belongs to the next section. Throughout Europe, this era forced Christmas to clarify its identity. Was it a sacred commemoration of the Incarnation, a cultural inheritance from medieval life, a social ritual with deep emotional resonance? Reformers answered differently, and communities adapted in their own ways. Some stripped the holiday to a quiet core. Others amplified its artistic expression. Still others preserved older customs just beneath the surface of official disapproval. Despite sectarian divides, one thing remained constant: the Nativity story itself. The image of a child born into humility, the glow of a star over a silent landscape, shepherds startled by angelic song. These motifs carried emotional power that transcended doctrinal disputes. Even in regions where festivities diminished, people still gathered to read the story, sing subdued hymns, or share simple meals. The season continued to offer a sense of reassurance. Echoing the earlier winter instincts humanity had always held, that light, even when faint, returns. When the 17th century tightened its grip on England and its colonies, Christmas, once buoyed by centuries of song, feasting, and ritual, suddenly found itself declared an enemy of moral order. The Puritan movement, armed with a rigorous vision of scriptural purity and social discipline, saw in Christmas not a moment of sacred warmth, but a tangle of medieval excess, pagan residue, and unregulated revelry. The holiday that had survived the fall of Rome, the rise of kingdoms, and the upheavals of the Reformation now faced something more severe. Official bans, public enforcement, and a cultural coldness that tried to quiet winter joy itself. The roots of this suppression stretched back to Puritan theology. Leaders argued that, because the Bible gave no explicit date for Christ's birth and no command to celebrate it, the feast was a human invention rather than divine instruction. They viewed the den of was sailing, the theatrical mama's plays, and the boisterous 12 Days, as moral dangers opened doors through which disorder could slip into the community. What seemed harmless to many felt, to Puritan eyes, like a threat to societal discipline. A festival so closely woven with laughter, feasting, and communal misrule could easily unravel the solemnity they sought to cultivate. In 1644, the English Parliament, then controlled by Puritan influence, scheduled a national fast day on December 25th, pointedly replacing Christmas with penitence. By 1647, Christmas, along with Easter and Whitsun, was officially abolished. Shops were required to stay open. Churches were ordered to treat the day like any other. Soldiers patrolled London's streets, looking for households that dared to decorate with holly or prepare special meals. Records describe confrontations between civilians and soldiers, with some towns staging small acts of resistance. Quiet gatherings behind closed doors. Subtle greenery hung where it might escape official notice, or whispered carols shared only within family walls. How deeply did the band really penetrate everyday life? Some diaries suggest people grudgingly complied to avoid trouble. Others hint that communities celebrated in disguise, finding creative ways to preserve tradition without attracting legal attention. Personal accounts from London describe women defiantly selling evergreens in the markets despite soldiers overturning their stalls. In Canterbury, crowds of townspeople rioted when officials attempted to shut down Christmas services. The holiday may have been outlawed on paper, but in the human heart, it proved much more difficult to extinguish. Across the Atlantic, in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Puritans took an even stricter stance. They viewed Christmas as a dangerous import from Anglican England and wasted no time eliminating it from their calendar. In 1659, the colony passed a law imposing fines on anyone caught celebrating the holiday with feasting games or even forbearing of labor. The ban lasted for over 20 years. New England settlers went about their work on December 25th, just as they did on any other winter day, while clergy preached against the disorderly practices associated with the season. Christmas did not become widely accepted in New England until the 19th century, long after the original Puritan laws had faded. These bans reveal an intriguing tension between social structure and seasonal instinct. Winter invites rest, reflection, and communal closeness. Even in the strictest societies, people longed for warmth and connection during the darkest weeks of the year. That longing clashed head-on with Puritan ideals, which emphasized restraint and spiritual vigilance. The conflict exposed a deeper truth about Christmas. It had grown far beyond the bounds of any single doctrine. Its power rested not only in theology, but in emotion, memory, and the shared human desire to gather when nights are longest. While Puritan regions suppressed the holiday, Christmas flourished elsewhere in Europe. In Germany, the Christkind tradition gained momentum. In Catholic regions of France, elaborate midnight masses filled churches with candle light. In Italy, living nativity scenes grew increasingly ornate. These contrasts made the English and New England bands feel even more extreme, underscoring how radically regional culture could reshape the meaning of a single feast. The English ban ended with the Restoration in 1660, when Charles II returned to the throne and quickly reinstated traditional celebrations. The public greeted the revival of Christmas with a mix of relief and exuberance. Feasts resumed, carols returned to churches, and the 12 days regained their familiar place in the winter calendar. Yet something had shifted. The memory of suppression lingered, leaving England more cautious about misrule and roady celebration than in earlier centuries. The seeds of a quieter, more domesticated Christmas had begun to sprout, even if they would not fully bloom until the 18th and 19th centuries. One curious legacy of the ban is the way it contributed to modern perceptions of Christmas as a time of home-centered intimacy. When public festivity became dangerous, families retreated indoors, gathering quietly around their hearts. The shift from public revelry to private reflection remained even after the laws vanished, influencing how later generations imagined the holiday. Christmas, once a communal street festival, gradually became a fireside ritual of family storytelling and gentle tradition. The Puritan suppression of Christmas stands as one of the clearest examples of how a cultural force can be challenged by law yet endure through sentiment. Despite fines, patrols, bans, and sermons, people continued to feel the pull of winter celebration. They kept memories alive in whisper songs and stubborn greenery tucked into windowsills. Even at its quietest, Christmas refused to disappear. By the early 18th century, after centuries of feast and misrule, suppression and revival, Christmas drifted into a quieter, more domestic form, lesser public carnival, and more a season of home letters, gentle gatherings, and reflective nostalgia. The turbulence of the Reformation and the Puritan bans had softened public exuberance, and Enlightenment sensibilities favored restraint, reason, and comfort over spectacle. Christmas didn't vanish. It simply changed its clothes, settling into parlors, drawing rooms, and candle-lit corners, where families shaped new rituals that felt personal rather than communal. This was the era when Christmas began to acquire the warm, intimate glow that would later define the Victorian imagination. The transformation began slowly in England. The Restoration had restored Christmas legally, but the old medieval riotousness never fully returned. Urbanization reshaped winter life, with more people living in cities. Large communal halls and open village greens no longer defined social space. Instead, families entertained guests at home, prepared modest but meaningful meals, and gathered around fires to exchange stories. Diaries and letters from the period reveal a growing emphasis on family reunions, quiet charity, and shared reflection. Christmas became less noisy, but more emotionally centered, a shift that carried a surprising sense of tenderness. Literature played a pivotal role in reshaping the season's mood. Writers of the 18th century embraced Christmas as a motif of memory and affection. Joseph Addison, writing in The Spectator, described the holiday as a time for heartfelt gathering, presenting it as a gentle reminder of familial continuity. Sir Walter Scott later captured this sentiment perfectly when he wrote of the simple feast and generous bowl that united families during the cold season. Their portrayals framed Christmas not as a chaotic festival, but as a haven, a warm respite from winter's chill and from life's everyday concerns. The Enlightenment also introduced a curious paradox. While many intellectuals criticized superstition and discouraged heavy ritual, they embraced the idea of seasonal hospitality and moral reflection. Christmas shifted from a liturgical or folkloric center into a cultural one, something families practiced with personal meaning, even if the churches themselves kept the celebration relatively subdued. Anglican sermons of the time emphasized charity, humility, and gratitude while leaving aside dramatic pageantry. The religious message simplified, becoming more introspective, focusing on inner transformation rather than outward festivity. Gift-giving during this period became more reserved but also more thoughtful. Instead of the boisterous exchanges of Saturnalia-style trinkets or medieval tokens exchanged in taverns and streets, families began presenting handmade items, embroidered handkerchiefs, knitted socks, small books of poetry, modest toys carved from wood. These gifts reflected affection rather than spectacle, folding emotional significance into objects of daily use. It was during this era that the idea of Christmas as a time of sentimental exchange rather than social inversion or mischief truly began to form. Music followed the same path of quiet reinvention. Many medieval carols had fallen out of use, their lively rhythms feeling out of step with Enlightenment propriety. But new carols emerged, written with sweeter melodies and more contemplative themes. Hymns such as Hark the Herald, Angels Sing, or Joy to the World, though not yet globally dominant, began circulating in various English and American congregations. These songs emphasize joy without revelry, hope without tumult. Their gentle cadences fit naturally into the softening emotional tone of the season. Even the sensory world of Christmas changed. Homes no longer burst with raucous laughter spilling into snowy streets. Instead, warm light glowed behind small paned windows, illuminating gatherings where families played games, read aloud, or simply rested together. Candles cast elongated shadows across polished wooden floors. Evergreen decorations, while less flamboyant than medieval garlands, continued to symbolize endurance during winter's depth. Bowls of oranges and spices filled the air with sweet, fragrance aromas that whispered of faraway lands and warm climates. Small luxuries reminding families of the expanding world. This quieter Christmas matched the emotional needs of an age grappling with political change and social uncertainty. Wars of succession, shifting alliances, and expanding global trade made life unpredictable. The home, therefore, became a sanctuary, a place where Christmas offered reassurance that despite the world's turmoil, some rituals remained steady. Families gathered to share news, mend relationships, or simply enjoy a rare pause in the year. This shift contributed to one of the holiday's most enduring qualities, its association with comfort, memory, and emotional restoration. Yet beneath this domestic calm lay unresolved tensions. Some reformers still question the holiday's legitimacy. Some rural areas clung to spirited older customs, resisting the gentler tone of urban bourgeois Christmas, and local traditions remained wildly diverse. In parts of Germany, families told winter tales involving ghostly visitors or mysterious gift-bringers who tested children's behavior. In Scandinavia, the Yule season retained echoes of ancient rituals, involving protective spirits or household guardians. In the American colonies, Christmas observance varied dramatically from festive revelry in the South to near total rejection in Puritan-influenced New England. Despite these regional differences, the 18th century undeniably softened and reshaped Christmas. It became contemplative rather than theatrical, affectionate rather than exuberant. The holiday lingered in handwritten letters, carefully prepared meals, and modest gatherings. It was during this era that Christmas began to feel truly seasonal. Not only a religious feast or folk festival, but a time of emotional rhythm, a pause in the year where people looked inward and toward one another. By the early 19th century, the world was changing faster than any previous generation had witnessed, and Christmas, quiet, domestic, and softly glowing from the previous century, was about to be swept into a cultural transformation, so profound that it would remake the holiday into the form we recognize today. Industrialization reshaped cities. Technology accelerated communication, and social landscapes stretched under the weight of crowded factories, bustling streets, and expanding middle classes, longing for stability and comfort. Into this restless age stepped the Victorian reinvention of Christmas, a dramatic cultural bloom that gathered centuries of scattered traditions and stitched them into a coherent, emotionally rich winter celebration. The Victorian era brought with it an obsession with nostalgia, morality, and sentimentality, each of which became a tool for reshaping Christmas. People suddenly looked backward with longing toward images of hearth family unity and pastoral calm, ironically idealizing scenes that rarely existed in the harsher medieval or early modern past. This longing found expression in literature, art, and domestic rituals. Families wanted to believe in a Christmas that soothed anxieties, softened industrial harshness, and offered reassurance in a world of chimney soot and mechanized noise. The holiday became a cultural balm, a carefully curated moment of gentleness. No figure shaped this reinvention more than Charles Dickens. His 1843 novella, A Christmas Carol, did not invent the modern Christmas, but it crystallized its emotional core, connecting generosity, redemption memory, and family warmth into a story so compelling that readers embraced it instantly. Dickens presented Christmas as a moral season, one that illuminated the plight of the poor, elevated charity as a civic duty, and offered every person, even a hardened miser like Scrooge, the chance to change. His descriptions of snow, covered streets, bustling markets, joyful families, and humble feasts struck a chord in a Britain yearning for emotional clarity. The novella sold out within days, and readers demanded more Christmas tales every year thereafter. Through Dickens, Christmas learned to glow. Victorian domestic rituals also flourished. Families decorated homes with holly ivy and mistletoe plants, now framed not as remnants of pagan symbolism, but as icons of winter beauty. But the most dramatic change came from Germany, the Christmas tree. Although German families had used decorated evergreens since the 16th century, the custom spread to Britain when Prince Albert, the German-born husband of Queen Victoria, introduced the tree to Windsor Castle. An 1848 illustration of the royal family gathered around their decorated tree, appeared in newspapers and ignited a trend across Britain and the United States. The Christmas tree became a symbol not of royal luxury, but of family intimacy, a living centerpiece of warmth during the cold season. Gift-giving also transformed. Instead of modest tokens exchanged sporadically, the Victorians embraced a structured ritual gifts placed under the tree, opened on Christmas morning, accompanied by family surprise and delight. The industrial economy made this possible. Mass-produced toys, books, puzzles, dolls, and small mechanical novelties became affordable to middle-class households. Shops decorated their windows with festive displays, creating the earliest forms of modern commercial Christmas, a development that would only grow in the decades ahead. The invention of the Christmas card further strengthened this domestic aesthetic. Sir Henry Cole commissioned the first commercial card in 1843, featuring a family toasting the season. Printing technology made cards inexpensive, and postal reforms reduced mailing costs. Soon families exchanged greetings across cities, countries, and continents. These cards carried images of snowy landscapes, even in regions that rarely saw snow robins perched on branches, children in cozy winter clothes, and idealized rural scenes. The imagined Christmas, snowy, picturesque, became as influential as the real one. Music underwent a renaissance as well. Ancient carols were rediscovered, arranged, and sung anew. Victorian hymnals revived medieval melodies, while composers created new pieces with rich harmonies suited to parlor gatherings and church choirs. Oh, come your faithful. Good King Wenceslas and God rest. Yerry Gentleman gained widespread popularity. The season became an auditory world of comfort. Layered over industrial chaos, chimneys roared outside. But inside parlors, voices merged in gentle harmony. Yet beneath this sentimental glow lay deeper social forces. The Victorians used Christmas to reinforce moral values, charity, family responsibility, kindness to children, and care for the poor. Factories often granted workers a rare day off. Newspapers published stories encouraging generosity. Philanthropic societies organized holiday dinners for impoverished families. The season became a momentary equalizer, a time to acknowledge inequalities that industrial growth had intensified. Dickens, with his relentless focus on social justice, inspired a cultural expectation that Christmas must not only comfort the comfortable, but also uplift the vulnerable. At the same time, the era's emotional emphasis produced new Christmas myths. The figure of Santa Claus began shifting from his earlier European forms into a more unified persona. American writers influenced by Dutch traditions in New York envisioned Saint Nicholas not as a solemn bishop, but as a jolly, magical traveler. Clement Clark Moore's 1823 poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, described a plump, cheerful figure arriving in a miniature sleigh pulled by reindeer, a portrayal that would eventually merge with later commercial imagery, though Santa's full evolution belongs to the next section. The Victorian period provided fertile soil for his growth. The sensory texture of Victorian Christmas was lush crackling fires, orange peels spiced with cloves, parlors decorated with ribbons, the glow of candles reflected in ornaments, the rustle of wrapping paper, and the crisp scent of pine. Snow, real or imagined, softened the world. Families gathered for games, songs, readings, and shared meals. The season became a time of ritual performance. Each gesture, hanging stockings, lighting candles, placing gifts infused with affection and meaning. One of the era's intriguing mysteries lies in how quickly the reinvention spread. Within a single generation, traditions from multiple countries, German trees, English carols, American Santa imagery, Dutch gift lore fused into a Christmas recognizable across the English-speaking world. The speed of print culture, expanding literacy, and aggressive publishing created a shared winter vocabulary that transcended borders. Christmas no longer belonged to one region or confession. It was becoming a global cultural story. By the end of the Victorian era, Christmas had completed its transformation. It was no longer solely a religious feast, nor merely a folk survival. It had become a cultural season rich with story ritual, family intimacy, and moral aspiration. Dickens had given it heart. Industrialization had given it scale, and domestic life had given it warmth. St. Nicholas entered the Victorian world, already carrying centuries of legend on his shoulders. But the coming decades would transform him from a regional bishop into a global gift-bearing icon. His journey from Myra to Manhattan, from medieval saint to jolly winter traveler, is one of the most remarkable cultural evolutions in holiday history. A transformation shaped by immigration poetry, illustrations, advertising, and the expanding reach of mass media. What began as a solemn figure of charity eventually became the warm red-cloaked embodiment of Christmas generosity, recognized in homes from Boston to Berlin. The historical Nicholas of Myra, a 4th-century bishop known for quiet acts of generosity, first entered Christian tradition as a protector of children, sailors, and the poor. Medieval Europe embraced him as a saint whose feast on December 6th featured small gifts for children. Coins slipped into shoes, sweet pastries left on windowsills, or modest tokens hidden by parents after church services. In Catholic regions, this feast remained deeply beloved. In the Low Countries, Centerlass arrived by horse or boat, a tall and dignified bishop wearing red robes and a mitre. He carried a ledger tallying good and bad deeds accompanied by helpers whose identities varied by region. His imagery blended Christian virtue with folk storytelling, giving children both comfort and a gentle sense of accountability. The story might have remained a patchwork of regional customs were it not for migration. In the 17th century, Dutch settlers brought Sinterklaas to New Amsterdam, later New York, planting seeds that would take root in American soil. These early recollections persisted long after the Dutch language faded, appearing in local newspapers and community stories. The character's name gradually softened from Sinterklaas to Santa Claus, shifting from bishop to folkloric figure. Yet, he lacked a consistent shape, personality, or role. Some writers imagined him as a mysterious winter visitor. Others portrayed him as a kindly gift-giver who rewarded children's good behavior. The cultural clay was soft, ready to be molded. The turning point arrived in 1823 with Clement Clarke Moore's poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, more commonly known as T.W., was the night before Christmas. The poem reimagined Santa Claus as a jolly miniature figure in a fur-lined suit, traveling in a sleigh pulled by 8 reindeer carrying a sack of toys, and slipping down chimneys with magical ease. Moore's Santa was warm, mischievous, and familiar, a figure who blended old-world legend with new-world whimsy. The poem spread quickly through newspapers and gift books, giving Americans a shared winter folklore. Children recited it, parents memorized it, and illustrators began sketching its imagery. Santa Claus was no longer a solemn bishop. He was becoming a companion of childhood imagination. As the 19th century progressed, illustrators refined his appearance further. Thomas Nast, the German-American political cartoonist, created a series of images in Harper's Weekly that solidified Santa's visual identity. Between the 1860s and 1880s, Nast depicted Santa as a plump bearded figure with a fursuit, wide belt, and rosy cheeks. He introduced the North Pole Workshop, the naughty and nice list elves, and the image of Santa reading letters from children around the world. These additions gave Santa a geography, a workforce, and a narrative structure, turning him into a character whose life extended beyond a single night. This creative expansion illustrates a broader trend, the Victorian desire to give Christmas not just emotion, but mythology. Santa Claus became the embodiment of playful kindness, a figure whose magic softened winter's harshness. At the same time, he became useful to parents and teachers as a moral symbol, encouraging good behavior and generosity. The saint who once left coins for the poor had become a global storyteller in red. Meanwhile, in Europe, Christmas gift-bringers continued to evolve. Germany maintained the Christkindl tradition, promoted by Luther, while Austria blended the Christ child with angelic imagery. In parts of France, Pierrot Noel emerged as a friendly winter figure. Scandinavia preserved Nissa, or Taunt House spirits, who delivered gifts if properly respected. These figures would later merge, influence, or coexist with Santa Claus as cultural exchange accelerated. The 19th century became a crossroads of winter folklore, with traditions traveling through immigration, print culture, and trade networks. One of the persistent historical curiosities is how seamlessly the saintly bishop and the whimsical elf-like character merged into a single figure without causing widespread cultural friction. The shift was gradual enough that communities simply adapted. Families who valued the religious roots of St. Nicholas continued telling his story on December 6th, while those drawn to the playful magic of Santa embraced the December 24th visit. In many regions, both traditions coexisted peacefully. The emotional core, generosity, kindness, and delight remained intact even as the imagery changed. Commercialization accelerated the transformation. By the late 19th century, department stores in New York, London, and Paris began featuring Santa Claus in window displays, greeting children, and promoting holiday sales. Parents brought children to meet Santa, merging folklore with consumer experience. Magazines published illustrations showing Santa delivering brand-name toys or reading catalogs. The figure stepped fully into the modern world, gaining cultural momentum that earlier saints or folk spirits had never possessed. The sensory imagery of Santa's rise is vivid: gaslit streets glowing behind frosted windows, children clutching illustrated books, families gathering around Christmas trees, imported from German tradition, stockings hung by the fire in quiet households, and store windows dazzling with mechanical toys. Santa Claus became the bridge between domestic intimacy and the growing spectacle of public Christmas displays. Even as commercialization deepened, the figure retained a sense of wonder. His mythology expanded alongside technological progress. Telegraphs brought him letters faster. Trains and steamships allowed him to travel farther. Later, radio broadcasts and films gave him a voice and a face that millions could share. Each innovation made Santa feel more present, more reachable, more real in the emotional lives of children. As the 20th century approached, Christmas decorations began lifting out of dim parlors and village squares and into a world glowing with new technologies, expanding global travel, and rapidly merging cultural aesthetics. The season's visual language, once simple garlands, candles, and greenery, began intertwining with electricity, industrial design, and the blending of customs from every corner of Europe and beyond. The result was a holiday atmosphere that felt both ancient and startlingly modern. A winter landscape shaped by German forests, American storefronts, global migration, and the shimmering promise of electric light. The Christmas tree, already a cherished domestic symbol thanks to German tradition, and Queen Victoria's popularization became the centerpiece of this evolving aesthetic. In the 19th century, trees were adorned with candles, a beautiful but precarious choice. Families lit them only briefly, gathering around to admire the soft glow reflecting off glass baubles, imported from Bohemia or hand-blown in German workshops. But the arrival of electric lighting changed everything. In 1882, Edward H. Johnson, a colleague of Thomas Edison, decorated a Christmas tree in New York with 80 electric bulbs, red, white, and blue, drawing curious crowds. Newspapers called it a marvel. And although electric lights were initially too expensive for most households, their symbolism was irresistible. By the early 20th century, as costs fell, electric Christmas lights became a defining feature of the holiday. The sensory impact was profound. Where once flickering candles illuminated only the inside of a home, electric lights could shine through windows, outlined rooftops, and eventually spread across entire streets. Cities discovered that Christmas illumination brought crowds, commerce, and cheer. From New York's Fifth Avenue to the boulevards of Paris, sparkling displays became civic celebrations. Light, long a metaphor of the season, became literal, wrapping winter darkness in glittering radiance. German influence remains strong in other traditions as well. Glass ornaments, tin angels, nutcrackers, and printed Advent calendars traveled across oceans through trade and migration. German-American communities especially nurtured these customs, and their aesthetic choices soon spread into mainstream American Christmas culture. The Advent calendar, originally a simple chalk line erased daily by children, evolved into printed calendars with tiny doors revealing pictures, chocolates, or small tokens, an anticipation ritual that cultivated daily wonder throughout December. Its popularity soared in Europe and later around the world, turning waiting itself into part of the season's joy. But Christmas aesthetics didn't belong solely to Europe. Migration patterns carried traditions across continents, shaping new hybrids. Scandinavian immigrants brought woven straw ornaments, simple candle arches, and the concept of higo, the warmth of cozy interiors during dark winters. Italian communities introduced elaborate nativity scenes, sometimes entire miniature villages crafted with loving detail. Mexican traditions brought patas, luminarias, and star-shaped piñatas, infusing the season with vibrant color and rhythmic procession. Filipino celebrations contributed the parol, a radiant star lantern crafted from bamboo and paper, symbolizing the Star of Bethlehem with a tropical luminosity. Every region added its own textures, colors, and rituals, widening Christmas from a European festival into a global canvas. One of the intriguing mysteries of this period is how easily these diverse aesthetics coexisted. Christmas trees stood beside nativity scenes. Scandinavian simplicity blended with American excess. Electric lights reframed ancient symbols. Rather than competing, these traditions layered themselves into a broad seasonal vocabulary. The holiday did not insist on uniformity. It invited reinterpretation. Toys and consumer goods also influenced Christmas aesthetics. With the rise of department stores, seasonal storefront displays became theatrical attractions. In New York, Macy's animated scenes drew thousands to peer into windows glowing with mechanical elves, snowy landscapes, and moving toys. In London, Selfridges and Harrods engaged in an annual contest of spectacle. These displays didn't merely reflect Christmas aesthetics. They shaped them. Families began decorating with motifs they saw in store windows, borrowing ideas that mixed fantasy with nostalgia. Inside the home, mass-produced ornaments and tinsel transformed domestic decorating into a shared cultural ritual. Tinsel, originally crafted from shredded silver in 17th century Germany, became accessible to the average household when manufacturers created shiny substitutes. The shimmering strands captured electric light, beautifully turning Christmas trees into dazzling sculptures. Christmas cards expanded visually too. Advances in chromolithography allowed richly colored images. Snowy landscapes, cozy cottages, angels in soft pastels, Santa clad in fur animals dressed for winter children, rosy-cheeked in imagined wonderlands. These cards circulated globally, spreading aesthetic themes across continents. Snow, in particular, became a universal symbol of Christmas even in countries where snow never fell. The Victorian fantasy of a white Christmas turned into a worldwide seasonal ideal, shaping everything from songs to advertisements. Meanwhile, music and film added emotional layers to the aesthetics. Radio broadcasts filled homes with carols, big band arrangements, and sentimental songs. Hollywood contributed iconic imagery through movies that depicted Christmas as a glowing tapestry of lights, family gatherings, and gentle magic. Films like It's a Wonderful Life or later White Christmas reinforced visual motifs, snow warmth, twinkling lights, red and green palettes that became embedded in global consciousness. Electricity also revolutionized public celebrations. Cities erected towering trees adorned with thousands of bulbs. Town squares shimmered under illuminated arches. Neighborhoods competed for the most dazzling displays. This democratization of light gave ordinary families a creative role in shaping Christmas aesthetics. Front yards transformed into glowing winter gardens, porches framed with multicolored bulbs, windows glowing with silhouettes of stars, bells, or snowy scenes. Yet, even amid this exuberance, older, quieter customs endured. Some families still placed candles in windows to symbolize welcome. Others gathered around nativity scenes made from clay straw or carved wood, gently reminding children of the holiday's spiritual heart. The coexistence of sacred and secular imagery became a defining feature of modern Christmas aesthetics. Rather than resolving the tension, the season embraced it, allowing each household to interpret the holiday through its own blend of faith, culture, and memory. By the mid-19th century, Christmas aesthetics had become unmistakably global. Trees, lights, ornaments, and festive colors could be found from Tokyo to Buenos Aires, from Lagos to Toronto. The season's imagery blended northern winter motifs with local adaptations, lantern festivals in East Asia, tropical trees draped in lights in Hawaii, or the Philippines' summer barbecues under sparkling garlands in Australia. Christmas was no longer simply transplanted. It was continually reinterpreted. The sensory world of this expanded Christmas was rich. The hum of electric bulbs warming cold nights, the crinkle of wrapping paper under fingers, the scent of pine mingling with the aroma of family recipes, radios crackling with beloved songs, bright lights reflecting on wet pavement, and the quiet glow of homes illuminated from within. Light had become the true aesthetic language of Christmas, woven through trees, homes, streets, cards, and public squares. The 20th century unfurled like a reel of flickering images, broadcast melodies, and booming advertisements, and Christmas stepped directly into that glow. What had begun as a winter feast rooted in ancient ritual and transformed by centuries of devotion, folklore, and domestic warmth, now entered an era shaped by cinema, radio, retail, and the unstoppable current of commercial imagination. Christmas did not lose its heart, but it gained a new layer of spectacle. Soft snow drifting across storefront windows, studio orchestras, swelling under sentimental lyrics, and Santa Claus appearing everywhere from billboards to children's story books. The season became a shared emotional landscape carried by mass media, spreading familiar images across oceans and embedding them deep within global consciousness. The rise of cinema played a defining role in this transformation. Early black and white films provided idealized portraits of Christmas snow-covered towns, warmly lit homes, and bustling street markets that codified the holiday's visual vocabulary. Silent films in the 1910s and the 1920s often used Christmas as a backdrop for stories of redemption, reunion, or gentle comedy. By the time Hollywood reached its golden age, Christmas scenes appeared not just in holiday films, but in dramas and romances, cementing the idea that December was a moment of emotional clarity. Films like Miracle on 34th Street, 1947, gave Santa Claus legal legitimacy in the public imagination, while It's a Wonderful Life turned Christmas Eve into a symbol of communal responsibility and the power of small kindnesses. Audiences walked out of theaters carrying not just memories, but expectations. Christmas should look and feel this way. Radio added another dimension. In the 1930s and 1940s, Families gathered around wooden consoles to hear orchestras play winter medley. Comedy programs offer holiday specials, and news anchors describe seasonal charity drives. Musicians delivered classic recordings that defined the sound of the season. Bing Crosby's White Christmas, released in 1942, became the best-selling single in history and permanently aligned the holiday with images of snowy landscapes, even for listeners in tropical climates. Radio made Christmas communal. Millions heard the same carols at the same time, creating a synchronized emotional experience across vast distances. Retail marketing rose to meet and amplify this cultural wave. Department stores became theatrical spaces where Christmas was not merely sold but staged. Animated window displays in cities like New York, Chicago, London, and Paris drew crowds who pressed against the glass to see mechanical reindeer moving trains or miniature winter villages. Inside, children waited in long lines to meet store centers, a tradition popularized in the early 20th century and given national attention by films and advertising. Retailers sponsored parades that brought Santa Claus into the public sphere with spectacle and fanfare. The most famous being the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, which effectively announced the start of the American holiday season. Advertising reshaped Santa's image with striking clarity. Though often credited solely to Coca-Cola's 1930s campaign, the modern Santa was the product of decades of artistic development. Illustrators like Norman Rockwell and Hayden Sunlum created images of Santa that emphasized warmth, generosity, and familiarity. Smiling eyes, a round face, and a comfortable red suit trimmed with fur. These images spread through magazines, posters, and packaging, unifying the figure across continents. The commercial Santa was not a departure from St. Nicholas, but a reinterpretation made for an age of mass production and shared aesthetics. Television soon became the new hearth. Animated specials like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer 1964, A Charlie Brown Christmas 1965, and later Frosty the Snowman 1969 created stories that parents and children watched together year after year. These specials fused music, narrative, and moral lessons into seasonal rituals. Their imagery, stop-motion characters, melancholy jazz melodies, or the soft glow of animated winter nights became part of the emotional architecture of modern Christmas. A curious cultural pattern emerged. Mass media did not merely reflect Christmas, it actively shaped it. Snow became a universal symbol, even in equatorial climates. Santa's workshop became a worldwide mythological space. Reindeer gained distinct personalities. Homecoming's heartfelt letters, slow-falling snowflakes, and last-minute miracles became tropes expected in seasonal storytelling. Christmas was no longer only a religious or historical tradition. It was a global narrative genre. Yet commercial expansion did not erase older meanings. Churches continued celebrating the Nativity with pageants, choirs, and candle-lit services. Families preserved rituals passed down through generations, baking traditional sweets, singing regional carols, placing hand-carved nativity figures on mantels. In many places, Christmas remained a season of reflection, prayer, and acts of kindness. But the scale of media influence meant that even these sacred customs lived alongside a vibrant secular and highly visual cultural layer. The rise of global consumer culture amplified Christmas even further. Shopping became a defining part of the season, with December sales supporting entire industries. Advertising campaigns encouraged gift-giving on a scale previously unimaginable. Wrapping paper, once rare, became a colorful staple. Children wrote letters to Santa that cataloged toys, produced by rapidly growing companies. The season's emotional emphasis on generosity intertwined with marketing, creating a cycle in which commercial activity reinforced sentimental pleasure. World War periods added complexity. During the First and Second World Wars, Christmas became a symbol of longing for peace and home. Soldiers wrote letters describing makeshift celebrations, trees cut from forests near the front, candles lit in trenches, carols sung across battle lines. One of the most powerful wartime moments occurred during the Christmas truce of 1914, when German and British soldiers spontaneously ceased fire, exchanged gifts, and sang carols together. These events deepened the emotional weight of Christmas as a season that gestures toward a peace, even amid conflict. After the wars, Reconstruction and rising prosperity helped spread Christmas across newly globalized markets. American media exports influenced celebrations worldwide, while European traditions continued migrating and blending. Japan adopted Christmas decorations, enthusiastically emphasizing romance and illumination. Latin American countries expanded their gift-giving customs, integrating local foods, dances, and music. African cities celebrated with lights and community events, merging Christian observance with regional culture. Australia and New Zealand created warm weather versions featuring outdoor gatherings and beachside barbecues. Christmas became a global festival shaped by local reinterpretation, each version distinct yet connected by shared imagery. Music, too, kept evolving. Jazz, pop, and later rock infused Christmas with new moods. Songs like Have Yourself, A Merry Little Christmas, The Christmas Song, and Jingle Bell Rock shifted the emotional palette from solemn to playful, from intimate to nostalgic. Later, soul, R&B, and pop artists expanded the canon, making the season feel sonically fresh for each generation. Christmas in the contemporary world unfolds as a vast tapestry of local customs, shared imagery, hybrid beliefs, and regional flavors. An evolving global festival that remains unmistakably unified yet endlessly diverse. As the 21st century advances, Christmas is no longer confined to the historical boundaries of Christendom. It thrives in countries where Christians are a minority, adapts to climates far removed from Europe's snowy winters, and blends with cultural rhythms that reshape the season into something unique. What emerges is a celebration that belongs to many worlds at once: spiritual, familial, commercial, communal, nostalgic, and deeply personal. In Europe, where many Christmas traditions originated, the holiday retains strong ties to community rituals and winter symbolism, though expression differs widely from region to region. In Germany and Austria, Christmas markets transformed town squares into glowing villages of wooden stalls, mulled wine, gingerbread, carved ornaments, and twinkling lights. Their atmosphere blends medieval charm with modern social life, turning December evenings into communal warmth. Germany also maintains Advent wreaths, St. Nicholas Day, and Krampus parades in alpine regions, reminders that winter folklore still walks beside Christian devotion. In Scandinavia, the season carries echoes of ancient Yuletide. Candle-lit processions on St. Lucia's Day in Sweden, bright and dark mornings with white robes and crowns of glowing candles. In Norway and Denmark, Jule celebrations highlight hearth-centered coziness, rich meals and rituals meant to welcome good fortune. Trolls, niece, or household spirits occasionally appear in stories told to children connecting contemporary life with folklore that long predates Christian influence. Here, Christmas is as much about surviving winter together as it is about theological themes. Southern Europe maintains an entirely different tone, warmer, more communal. Italy's Christmas season stretches from early December to the Epiphany, shaped by nativity scenes, preppy, that families arrange with meticulous detail. In Spain and Latin America, the Padas reenact Joseph and Mary's search for shelter, turning neighborhoods into moving street performances, illuminated by candle light. Gifts traditionally arrive not only from Santa Claus, but from the Three Kings on January 6th, anchoring the season in biblical narrative rather than northern folklore. In the Americas, Christmas has expanded into a broad cultural spectrum. The United States mixes religious observance with dazzling commercial spectacle. Suburban light displays cinematic nostalgia, charity initiatives, and family traditions shaped by dozens of immigrant cultures. African American communities often celebrate Christmas alongside Kwanzaa, merging heritage and holiday in unique ways. In Mexico, La Christmas Eve is celebrated with midnight mass fireworks and festive meals, while Las Posadas form a beloved 9-day ritual. In the Caribbean, Christmas adopts the rhythms of steel drums, parang music, dances, and foods, seasoned by regional identity. South America blends spirituality and joy in forms as varied as its landscapes. In Colombia and Venezuela, celebrations begin early December with No de Laces, an ocean of candles illuminating streets and doorways. In Brazil, where December falls in high summer, Christmas becomes a bright outdoor festival. Santa Claus arrives in tropical attire and families gather around tables of fruit, roasted meats, and chilled desserts. Snow is imagined rather than experienced, but the emotional tone remains unmistakably Christmas. Across Africa, Christmas varies according to history, climate, and community. In Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya, church services are vibrant with music, dancing, and bright fabrics transforming sacred spaces into joyful celebrations. Families travel long distances to reunite. In South Africa, where Christmas lands in summer, beach gatherings and outdoor meals join traditional services. While decorations echo global motifs, local adaptations, bright colors, African carols, regional foods give the holiday a distinctive identity. Asia too has embraced Christmas in unexpected ways. In the Philippines, the longest Christmas season in the world stretches from September through early January. Lanterns called paroles hang from windows and streets, symbolizing both the Star of Bethlehem and cultural pride. Simbangabi, a series of dawn masses, anchors faith at the heart of a country where Christmas is both sacred and festive. Japan, though not majority Christian, approaches Christmas as a celebration of light romance and seasonal wonder. Illuminated cityscapes glitter with meticulous artistry, and Christmas Eve is treated as a romantic holiday akin to Valentine's Day. Meanwhile, South Korea blends Christian observance with commercial celebrations, including gift-giving decorations and public concerts. In China, Christmas is celebrated mainly as a secular festival in urban areas. Shopping districts glow with lights. Restaurants offer holiday menus, and young people exchange gifts as symbols of friendship. A curious tradition has emerged of giving decorated apples on Christmas Eve, a pun based on the word for peace. In India, Christian families decorate banana and mango trees, hang paper lanterns, and prepare sweets for neighbors of all religions. Across Southeast Asia, Christmas often fuses with local festivals, becoming a shared moment of communal joy even among non-Christian populations. One of the fascinating mysteries of the modern world is how Christmas maintains a cohesive global identity despite such enormous variation. Snowbound imagery thrives in tropical regions. Santa Claus appears in countries with no historical ties to St. Nicholas. Nativity scenes find homes in marketplaces alongside illuminated stars, cartoon reindeer, and local crafts. Rather than fragment, these differences coexist. Christmas has become a cultural language spoken, with a regional accent recognizable everywhere yet never identical. Technology has amplified this interconnectedness. Social media spreads images of Christmas markets, decorated homes, and festive foods across the world, inspiring families to adopt traditions from thousands of miles away. Global film and music industries continue exporting Christmas narratives, romantic comedies set in snow-covered towns, smooth jazz renditions of classic carols, and animated stories that circulate through streaming platforms. Even cultures with no winter season embrace the aesthetic, creating Christmas events illuminated by LED displays under warm evening skies. But amid the bright lights and commercial frenzy, many communities still hold closely to the spiritual core of the season. Midnight Mass remains one of the most attended services of the year across Christian-majority countries. Carols, whether sung in Gothic cathedrals or small village chapels, continue to carry centuries of devotion. Acts of charity, food drives, community meals, fundraising concerts echo the older seasonal impulse toward generosity, built from the instinct that winter should be softened through shared kindness. Modern Christmas achieves something rare. It balances global fusion with personal meaning. For some, it is a sacred commemoration of divine birth. For others, a cultural festival of lights and warmth. For many, it is simply a time to gather to rest and to mark the passing of another year with gratitude, reflection, and hope. Although commercial pressures sometimes overshadow the quieter aspects, people still carve out space for memory and meaning. A candle lit for someone lost, a handwritten card tucked into a stocking, a whispered blessing before a meal. By weaving together ancient rituals, medieval warmth, Victorian sentiment, and modern global aesthetics, Christmas has become a testament to humanity's ability to adapt tradition to the needs of each era. Its future, like its past, will continue to evolve, reshaped by technology, migration, climate, and cultural imagination. Christmas enters the modern era not as a single tradition, but as a vast, shimmering constellation of rituals, aesthetics, emotions, and stories. Some ancient, some Victorian, some invented just decades ago. And yet, despite this dizzying diversity, the holiday has become one of the few global observances marked in some form by billions of people across nearly every culture and climate. It is both spiritual and secular, both intimate and spectacular, both solemn and playful. It can be found in candle-lit chapels at midnight, in crowded shopping districts overflowing with neon lights in desert towns, where December nights are warm, and in snowy villages, where ancient bells echo through frosted air. How an ancient midwinter instinct turned into a planetary festival is one of the great cultural journeys in human history. The 21st century finds Christmas shaped by unprecedented forces, globalization, digital communication, migration, climate shifts, and the blending of cultural practices across borders. These forces do not diminish the holiday. They stretch it, pulling it into new shapes while preserving its emotional center. Cities across the world illuminate entire districts with elaborate light displays, sometimes powered by renewable energy, merging spectacle with sustainability. In Tokyo, LED installations transform public parks into radiant dreamscapes. In São Paulo, shopping centers become elaborate storytelling environments. In Berlin, Christmas markets combine medieval charm with modern cuisine and handcrafted art. In Nairobi, choirs perform in open-air gatherings beneath starlit skies. The holiday pulses through world capitals and small towns alike, each adding its own warmth. Migration continues to reshape the festival. As families move across continents, they carry traditions with them. Recipes, ornaments, songs, stories, and introduce them to neighbors who may embrace or adapt them. An Indian family in Toronto might decorate a Christmas tree while also preparing spiced sweets shared with their community. A Nigerian choir in London might infuse traditional carols with rhythms from home. A Filipino lantern festival in the Middle East might draw families of many faiths simply because the beauty of glowing paroles crosses cultural lines. These exchanges enrich the season, expanding its language of light and generosity. Technology, too, has altered the texture of Christmas. Video calls bridge families separated by oceans. Digital advent calendars offer daily stories or tasks. Live-stream church services connect communities unable to meet in person. Social media amplifies creativity, encouraging homemade crafts, baking traditions, and DIY decorations to spread across countries. Online playlists create shared soundscapes, while digital greetings replace printed cards for many households. Yet even with these innovations, the emotional impulse remains the same: to reach across distance with warmth, to offer comfort in the coldest or busiest time of the year. The sensory experiences of modern Christmas remain deeply comforting. The glow of lights, whether electric or candle, casts a soft brilliance on streets and homes. Evergreen scent lingers in the air. Music drifts from shops, radios, and living rooms. Kitchens filled with recipes passed down through generations. Wrapping paper crinkles. Ornaments clink softly as they're hung on branches, and children whisper excitedly in the hallway, long before dawn. Families gather, whether physically or digitally, to share meals and memories. Even quiet houses find small rituals, a lit candle, a warm drink, a moment of thought anchoring them to the season. What emerges from this global kaleidoscope is a festival that does not belong to any one people, climate, or era. It is a holiday of continuous evolution shaped by overlapping histories, expanding geographies, and shifting meanings. It is a reminder that humans, wherever we live, seek reasons to gather to give a hope and to create beauty against winter's long nights. As the season draws to a close, one can imagine a whisper carried across continents, a gentle breath that moves through decorated streets, snowy fields, sandy beaches, dense cities, quiet villages, and candle-lit churches. It threads through festivals shaped by centuries of ritual and moments newly invented this year. It weaves through warm kitchens and silent midnights. It settles softly in the hearts of those who celebrate and those who simply observe. And in that whisper lies the quiet truth that has sustained Christmas for thousands of years. Light returns, warmth grows, and the human spirit finds its way through it.